All right, guys, we're going to start this show shortly. I'm looking forward to connecting with you. A lot we're going to cover today. You know, I want to talk Charlottesville's economy and whether population growth should be so closely tied to economic growth in the city of Charlottesville. And why this question is important is because the city is obviously landlocked from a real estate standpoint. So if it's landlocked from a real estate standpoint, should we be focusing on population growth to drive economic growth within our fair city, or should we instead be talking empowering citizens to grow the economy by bettering their educational skill set and professional know-how? And if we better our citizens and improve their educational skill sets, their technical skill sets, does that then in turn cause and help the economy to grow? The reason I want to talk about this is because our guest, Alex Erpy, who we love on the I Love CVille network, posted on my Facebook page yesterday just a fantastic comment that had me thinking quite a bit. I will read the comment from Alex now, and then we'll start the program. On a more macro scale, one might ask, why are we pursuing economic growth in Charlottesville via a constantly increasing population instead of thinking about how to make the people living here already more prosperous? The price of economic growth via population growth is always and everywhere higher housing costs. Just some food for thought. Great comment from Alex. So we'll start the program with Alex Erpy on the I Love CVille network. And then we got to get to this CDC news. I don't know if you're watching, but the CDC has got some new mask mandates that are on the horizon. Alex, we have not started the show yet. We just turned the mics on. So I'm going to stop talking here in a second. Judah's going to count me in with the intro. I'll thank some of our presenting partners, and then we'll lead with you.
Absolutely. Sounds great.
All right, fantastic. Judah, we are ready to rock and roll, so we're in your hands, sir. Guys, good Tuesday afternoon and welcome to the I Love CVille show. Thank you kindly for joining us on a gorgeous day in Central Virginia. My name is Jerry Miller. A pleasure to connect with you guys through the I Love CVille network. We're live in Charlottesville, across the Commonwealth, the country, and the world. We're presented by Skooma Boutique Dispensary, a dispensary on the Charlottesville Downtown Mall that's educational, it's approachable, it's locally owned, and it's doing business the right way with certificates of analyses on everything sold inside Skooma Boutique Dispensary. We thank the good doctor of Scott Wagner Integrated Medicine for being a part of the I Love CVille show and our advertising agency, VMV Brands. We've worked alongside Dr. Wagner, Kristen, and the team for almost 10 years now at VMV Brands and I Love CVille. Judah Wickhauer is our director. Judah, you are A-plus people, and from one A-plus person to another, let's welcome Alex Erpy to the show, if we could, Judah Wickhauer. Guys, Alex Erpy is the CEO, the Chief Executive Officer of Emergent Financial Services. He left a comment on my Facebook page yesterday that literally had me thinking, talking with my wife, talking with Judah and some of the other guys about this comment. So, Alex, first, thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. It's fun to be on.
It's great to have you, my friend. I'm going to read your comment. So my comment, Alex's comment was associated with a post I did yesterday. And the post I did yesterday, if you want to go to my Facebook page or I Love CVille or the Instagram or LinkedIn or Twitter to find it, it's there. It's tied to historical rental vacancy rates. In Charlottesville City, when compared to Virginia, and Charlottesville City, when compared to the United States, has rental vacancies that are next to none. A lot of people want to live here, so apartments are being rented left and right. And because the supply is low and demand is high, price points are going through the roof, and renting an apartment in the city of Charlottesville is oftentimes more expensive from a monthly debt service standpoint than home ownership outside the urban ring or somewhere in central Virginia. So Alex leaves this bona fide, beautiful, and super intelligent comment that I'm going to get out of your way here and have you just analyze or offer perspective on this, Alex. Alex Erpy, CEO of Emergent Financial Services, says, alternatively, on a more macro scale, one might ask why we are pursuing economic growth in Charlottesville via a constantly increasing population instead of thinking about how to make the people living here already more prosperous. The price of economic growth via population growth is always and everywhere higher housing costs. Just some food for thought. Alex Erpy, the show is yours, my friend.
Yeah, what struck me about the feed that I was reading a lot of the comments on your post on Facebook, and it always strikes me as interesting that a lot of times when we talk about housing prices, right, and the need for affordable housing and increasing housing costs, increasing rental costs, we typically only focus on the micro part, which is housing supply, housing demand, right? But one of the things you learn very quickly in economics, back when I was at UVA even, is, and just through my time doing research and working with Emergent Financial Services, is that very frequently there's really not a major city in the world that doesn't have an affordable housing crisis. Because the more people that you have living in a certain area, eventually it becomes very difficult to keep the housing supply stock up unless you're willing to build up. That's why you end up with high rises in New York City. I mean, I have lots of family there. It's inevitable that that's what happens because you're trying to fit more and more people into a certain space. And historically, there's two ways you have economic growth, right? One is per capita, meaning per capita is just like per person, basically. And per capita economic growth means instead of each individual person making on average $30,000 a year, each individual person now makes $50,000 a year. So it's one type of growth. The other type of economic growth is just, well, GDP goes up. Oh, well, there's more goods, more people, more produced, and the economy is bigger. But that doesn't necessarily translate to each individual person having more money in your pocket. If you got 10 people making $30,000 a year, and then you go up to 100 people each making $30,000 a year, you have economic growth. You multiplied your growth by 100 times, but each person isn't actually any better off. They're still all making the same per capita. So it just struck me as interesting that maybe one of the things we could think about is how, and which I think we don't often discuss, is how much does Charlottesville and Albemarle as a community want to grow? Like, how big do we want to be in terms of the number of people living here and so forth? Because this is just from experience. I've lived in a very small town in California with, like, I would say maybe 1/10 of the population of Charlottesville.
Wow.
And I visited family in New York, which has hundreds of times the population of Charlottesville. And I always laugh when I hear people in Charlottesville talk about the traffic here, because I'll say, this is nothing. I mean, when you lived and spent time in a major city, that's when you really see traffic and the impact of a lot of people living in a very small area. I mean, as you always say, we're kind of landlocked in Charlottesville and Albemarle. And so one of the things I think we have to think about just as a community, and all communities have to do this, is there's economic growth, there's population growth, and sometimes you can't necessarily, if you want to have a smaller area, you can't pursue economic growth by saying, well, can we just bring in more people and that'll grow? Because you're going to change more than just your GDP. You're going to change just the nature of where you live, and you're going to introduce externalities, which is like, externalities is an economic term for something you don't often think about, like a second effect or an unforeseen effect.
i.e. housing prices going up.
Exactly. It's not the first thing you think of, right? When you say, well, I can bring in a company with 100 new people, your first thought is always, oh, more GDP, more jobs, maybe they'll spread some wealth to local businesses, but then comes second order, more traffic, more housing is going to be needed, more for temporarily. There's going to be a high number of people renting until they decide where to buy. So there's always second order effects that come into play.
Okay, I want to unpack this here. I thought that was very well described. And in essence, it comes down to this. If we, as leaders in Charlottesville, figure out how to empower our citizens even more, and empowerment in this particular conversation comes down to education or career skill set. We improve the career skill set of our current population, then that current population should be able to get jobs that pay them more money, which in turn could drive the economy, and do it in a way by not increasing the population. Alternatively, and really how Charlottesville its economy is growing, and the statistics back this up, is people that have either ties to UVA or ties to a major employer that's setting up another shop within Charlottesville. Dexcom, publicly traded company, setting up shop at Dairy Central, adjacent to Dairy Market, is a perfect example of this. Another good example of this, Joffrey Woodruff, the hedge fund titan, doing the code building of the downtown mall, creating jobs, a lot of these jobs being filled by people outside the area. And I think what really could impact this economy is this new $125 million data science school that's going to come to market. Once this data science school starts matriculating students through it and graduating, these students, at least some of them, Alex and I are good examples of this, are going to go from UVA and stay here and get like a six-figure job working for one of Joffrey's businesses or any of the many businesses out in Charlottesville or Central Virginia that need data science analysis. So my follow question to you, and I think I posted this on Facebook, we have a world-class university in our backyard. Is economic growth via an increased population not inevitable because of UVA being in our backyard?
Well, and I think you're right in a sense. I mean, because you're always going to have, because of UVA, what I would call maybe more accurately population exchange. Because in terms of universities, right, we're exchanging a lot of students. And when I talk to natives in Charlottesville, a lot of times I say, well, my kid went to school somewhere else and didn't come back to Charlottesville, right? So you're always going to have what I think is exchange, where people who come to UVA, like you and me, we just stay right on because we love Charlottesville. We come to fall in love with the place, and we want to do our businesses here, right? And then you don't have people that go to a university elsewhere and don't return to Charlottesville, right? The quality of the school, I think you're right. The quality of UVA being one of the top universities, public universities in the country, draws a lot of people. So you're inevitably going to have some kind of population growth. I guess the question is, as a community, do we encourage more? Do we go out and seek more large companies from outside to come here, bringing people with them, or do we take another track? And if we do that, there may not necessarily be anything wrong with that, right? Because that is more people spending more money in local stores. But when we do that, we then have to say, well, we are now willing to accept
the second order,
some of the costs that come with that. Exactly. Are we willing to accept the second order effects that come with that? And a lot of places are, right? I mean, you can get very wealthy on Wall Street, right? But you have to accept a lot of sacrifices to do that, right? And Charlottesville can increase its GDP through this method of really encouraging more and more tech companies to come here, and we can have increased wealth by doing that, but there are costs to doing that, and the important thing is to know them in advance.
Let's say you're a tech company, financial firm, maybe you're in fintech. I mean, goodness, data science is like every industry now. If you have essentially this farm system and the data science school coming to market, baseball analogy, you love baseball. This farm system, data science school is like AAA. It's like AAA baseball. If I'm a CEO of a business, a partner of a firm, an owner of a firm, I'm thinking I set up shop as close to this AAA baseball team, data science school, as humanly possible. And then the 3-4 years that their students are matriculating through the school, you try to lure them with whatever you can, incentivize them, and say, here's why you want to go from, you're a star in AAA, and you can go to any major league team, but you should stay at this Charlottesville team because you know the area. We can offer you a substantial salary that's going to give you quality of life and the opportunity to buy a home and create your version of the American dream. That's how I see it playing out. What do you think?
Oh, I agree. I think it's very enticing. I mean, the hope would be, right, that because you've got this data science school here in Charlottesville, that we're encouraging people who are living here, maybe students coming through a community college or coming through to go there, right? And now we can sort of increase also the wealth of people living in our own community that have gone through this school, right? But as we know, it doesn't always work that way because most universities, including public ones, right, there's more bang for the buck from an out-of-state student than there is from an in-state student, just from a purely economic perspective. So it may not necessarily work that way, and that's one thing to think about, but I think you're absolutely right. When the more, like we talked about, I think this was a couple of weeks ago, where one of the reasons Virginia is one of the top states, the top state for business in the country, according to that survey from CNBC, it wasn't necessarily cost of living or cost of doing business. It was the educated nature of the workforce. So you now add in another major source of education, of an educated workforce, and you're going to have companies that are going to say this is a good place to do business for that precise reason, and I'm going to go there, and these people will stay. So it's definitely an interesting development, I would say, that school is coming here, because it can go one of two ways, right? Either the way that we might suspect, where you have more people coming from out of state coming to the school and then staying in Charlottesville, but also I think it's a tremendous opportunity for, if they can make, I would say, connections, just like UVA has done with PVCC, right? There's that guaranteed admissions program for the College of Arts and Sciences. They can make good connections for local students here as well. I think you might also be able to see some of that per capita growth and saying, well, what can we do to increase opportunities for people that are already living here by saying, all right, you can do a PVCC, College of Arts and Sciences data school track.
I'm going to throw this to you. This is a true or false, and then give me a why. And this is going to be kind of a loaded question here. Okay? Alex Erpe is the CEO of Emergent Financial Services. Guys, Emergent Financial Services, honest, character, integrity, researched, approachable. Emergent Financial Services if you want to build your wealth. True or false here? Charlottesville in 10 years is going to be more wealthy with its population, more white with its population, more affluent with its population, and have a stronger economy than ever before 10 years from now.
I would say true, false, and so true on the more affluent, true on the wealthier, true on a stronger economy. I'm not so sure on more white. I think the Latino population in particular in Charlottesville is growing very rapidly, and I think when you sum it all together between Latinos, African Americans, Asians, a lot of the refugee population coming here, I'm not convinced that it'll be more white.
Okay.
I mean, I'd grant that the tech industry does bring in a lot of white people, but I have sort of my confidence in the Latino community to be making up a lot of those grounds. And also, I think there's been a good push I've heard more and more conversation saying, how can we make sure that really successful minority students in Charlottesville don't leave and never come back?
Okay, so I'll follow up with that. This is a perfect segue for you. How do we get students of color going to a school like this data science school? Guys, when this goes to market, when this opens, this is going to be a world-renowned data science school backed by $125 million of Joffrey Woodruff's money, and ample job opportunity with a guy that specializes in data science in Joffrey, a couple miles away from the university. Okay, so how do we get students of color more into data science? Heck, even STEM. I mean, the numbers speak that STEM is dominated by white males.
So that's an interesting question. I think part of it is just, I think, sharing the stories of people that have done it. In other words, if you're just speaking from a Latino perspective, right? If I growing up as a Latino only ever hear, well, this guy made it with the landscaping company, you should only go into starting a restaurant, you should really only do these certain type of things, then I might well grow up and say, well, that's the only thing I can do. That's what Latinos do. We've always done that. You don't really go into anything else. But if I see a couple role models and they're highlighted to me, because we know there are, right? We know that there are very successful Latinos in finance, there are a lot of successful African Americans in the sciences, in NASA, in a lot of places, right? So if we highlight those stories and we do, it's one of the things that really we started with Forward Adelante, Olga Morse, 10 plus years ago, right? One of the reasons we started Forward Adelante, the Latino networking group here in Charlottesville, is saying it's about just sharing the stories. We don't even have to go out and produce and create Latinos that are doing small business entrepreneurship. They're there already. We just have to highlight them and show how successful they are and let people know, hey, look, they're already doing it. And maybe right now there's only one or two, but if they can do it, you can do it also. So rather than, it's, Olga used to call it always like a hand up, in the sense of going to someone and saying, you can do this too. Instead of saying, oh, this, you can't do this, everything's stacked against you, Latinos don't do this, black kids don't go into science. We go to them and say, no, look what he did. He's a Latino, he went into this. He's an African American, he became this successful. She's an African American, she became really successful. And the more we highlight those, I think the more you just get inspired. I mean, part of the reason I'm in finance is because my father, who is Cuban American, was in finance, right? So you just grow up, and my thought process was never, oh, I'm Cuban, Cubans don't do finance, because there were hardly, I mean, when my dad was starting, there were hardly any Latinos in finance anywhere in the country, right? But my thought process wasn't that. The statistics didn't matter to me growing up. The only thing that mattered was, well, my dad's doing it, so why can't I do it? Like, he's a Cuban and he's in finance, I can be a Cuban American who's in finance. So I think that plays into a lot of it. It's highlighting what successful minority entrepreneurs are doing in Charlottesville, and then saying to the next generation, you can do this as well.
Here's, I'm gonna give you props and Xavier props here, but I'll give you the question before I give you guys some props and the firm props. What's your crystal ball of what Charlottesville is, looks like, how it ticks, how it functions, how the economy is doing in 10 years from now? Okay, and before I do, his father is Xavier Yerpe. He's the co-star of Today y Mañana. It airs Thursdays at 10:15 a.m. on the I Love CVille network. Xavier, Alex, Michael, and Nicholas Yerpe, the core team behind Emergent Financial Services, family-owned, locally owned, a financial firm that you can undoubtedly trust. Your crystal ball before we get to current market conditions of Charlottesville 10 years from now.
Oh, a 10-year crystal ball. You really didn't.
So in 10 years, are you 40 in 10? Are you 42, 43?
Yeah, in 10 years, I'll be 39.
Okay, so you're 29 here. So in 10 years, he'll be knocking on 40's door here.
Knocking on 40.
Okay.
Yeah, very interesting. I mean, I do see, my suspicion is in 10 years, we're going to see a larger Charlottesville in terms of population. I think it's going to be a wealthier Charlottesville. The school's going to bring in a lot of people. My hope that I'm seeing, and I think is going to really be the case, is a lot more small businesses is what I'm hoping. Because I think we're really making a nice push of saying, how do we make sure small business does well in Charlottesville? And I think we're seeing that in the area. We're seeing that with a lot of nonprofit groups really saying, okay, small business is going to be the backbone of Main Street success, right? We might bring in really large companies here. We might bring in large corporations, but if we're going to be a thriving city, the small business is going to be there. And I think we're seeing more and more of a recognition of that here, and really just celebrating what entrepreneurs can do and what minority entrepreneurs can do in particular, right? And I think my hope is that that's what we're going to see in 10 years, a really thriving Latino, African-American, minority entrepreneur community, and a really just thriving small business community in general. And I see the seeds for that to happen as long as we just sort of keep our foot on that pedal and don't let up and sort of give into the temptation of saying, well, this might go faster if we just bring in this really big company. rather than saying, well, it might take longer, but why don't we develop also? Why don't we also put some resources, keep the resources going to small businesses? So I think I'm seeing just a much larger Charlottesville, I suspect, than is here now. My suspicion is we won't be a 50,000 person city. I suspect we'll probably be around maybe 60 or so.
Yeah, I appreciate that comment. I agree with that comment. A little idealism from the free market statistics guy, a little idealism from there.
You have to have a little idealism, right? If you're too pragmatic all the time, then you just sit there and say, why am I even doing this?
Alex Erpy is the CEO of Emergent Financial Services. Hey, man, why is the market down today? I mean, we got the CDC now going on record. I don't know if you guys saw this here. The CDC now going on record saying that they're encouraging people to wear masks inside in areas that are proliferated with COVID. Is that impacting the market, and one of the reasons it's red?
I think it is. I think the market's a little. I mean, this is earnings week. There's a lot of earnings coming in. It's been, even yesterday, the market was a little anxious, just awaiting earnings reports. But today, especially, I mean, before I went on, we were 1% off the highs. So, and that's pretty significant in market terms. For major indices down 1% is major. And I think what we're seeing is just a little nervousness on the part of the markets. As I was reading up on the CDC, as you say, indoors, we're looking in particular areas. They're going to say the vaccinated should wear masks again. We're seeing, at least according to CNBC that I was looking up earlier, some data out of Israel is suggesting some of the vaccines are waning in effectiveness. In other words, this may resemble more the flu vaccine than like your vaccine for hepatitis or meningitis, where you take it and like you're set for life.
Yeah.
Exactly. Polio, you take it once, you're good. This may resemble more flu vaccine, where we're trying to piece together every year, what's the new strain, what looks a little different, how do we get this, does it work, did it not work this time? Because Israel, I think they're down in some cases to 43% effectiveness. And again, that hasn't been peer reviewed, but CNBC was at least reporting that is getting the market a little nervous. I think we're also seeing every time Pfizer and Moderna come out and say, we might need another booster shot, the market, this can't be good. So I think that's what we're seeing. Less so much, I think, the effect of people having to wear masks in certain areas, but as my suspicion is back on that, and people are going to say, I really don't care at this point. And you always, how do you balance protecting people, but also saying we want people to be encouraged to be vaccinated? And if you say, come on, be vaccinated, but you still have to wear the mask, you're relying on the stick instead of the carrot. You're
well said.
Be vaccinated because it's really scary to get COVID, not because your life will change for the better. So I think that's always a concern. But my suspicion is the market is looking a little forward, and they're worried less about the CDC guideline and more about why is the CDC changing the guideline. And does this bode ill if the vaccines prove to be less effective than we were assuming 6 months ago?
Dr. Scott Gottlieb of CNBC says, let's look at what the United Kingdom is going through with the Delta variant. And he says the United Kingdom is a good barometer of what we can expect with the United States. And the Delta variant has run through the UK pretty hard, like it's running through the United States. But he sees it eventually waning here in our country. Anywhere you want to go with this? Do you have any fear that there's a lockdown coming on the horizon, or is that now past its point where Americans won't accept that anymore?
I feel Americans will not accept lockdown at this point. Masks is a different story, but my suspicion is lockdown would receive major pushback, particularly since vaccination at this point is available to those who
don't have it,
choose to participate. Yeah. We're no longer in a scenario where you're sitting there saying you have a large swath of people that want the vaccine but can't get it. At this point, people are sort of being able to freely choose whether or not. And my suspicion is that lockdown, particularly small businesses, are going to say, why do I have to now suffer again when people are free to decide whether or not they want to be vaccinated? I think that's going to be part of the pushback there. And I think, I'm going to be totally honest, I think we need to prepare ourselves, particularly from a business market side, in terms of how we choose to invest, how we run our businesses, for the possibility that this is going to become endemic. In other words, we live with the flu every year, and we have flu seasons. I lost some relatives in a flu season that killed the one in 2018, 2019, where about 80,000 people died of the flu, right? And we need to prepare ourselves that if that's the case, how do we function as a society? In other words, do we keep resorting to very powerful lockdown methods to mitigate the impact of something that might never disappear? Or do we at some point say, all right, what can we do to be safe, aka wash your hands, don't go to work if you're sick, things we should have been doing all along? Do we go back to relying on those to protect us in certain scenarios, right? Because the lockdown, I think we saw from last year, and at least from what I'm reading, the science is increasingly suggesting that major big-time lockdowns that devastate small business and keep people in their homes have so many negative side effects that they may not be worth it from a risk-reward perspective. And I think my suspicion is the fact that the CDC is not even touching that area, that we're not going to go back there, is my suspicion.
This guy is the CEO of Emergent Financial Services, brilliant man, Alex Erpy, CEO of Emergent Financial Services. Before I ask you about Today y Mañana on Thursday, dude, the sell-off of Chinese stocks is noticeable and tangible. JD.com, NIO, just to name a few. I own NIO. I'm looking at NIO now, flirting with 10% down today alone. JD.com, 6% and change. You're looking at Alibaba. Alibaba's at a tumble of 8% right now. The Chinese government is trying to essentially, maybe manipulate's not the right word, maybe exert more control. Is a better description of what's happening, and the lack of transparency is impacting positions in my portfolio and those of everyone that own Chinese positions. Anywhere you want to go on this topic?
It is. This is a very serious issue because we always talk about, and you and I have talked about ESG, environmental, social governance, and those are the decision on whether or not to purchase certain stocks based on what they do. This is a very different scenario because what we're talking about here is purchasing stocks when we don't know the financials of the company. Because basic primer, right? U.S. companies, right? They are required to put out financials at least on a quarterly basis, I believe, saying how much did we earn, what are our revenues, what's our profit, what are our expenses. And these financials are very frequently audited. They have to be audited. In other words, a third party comes in, looks at this and says, yes, you put out these numbers by taking reasonable steps to figure out what your actual revenues were, what your actual expenses were. In other words, no funny business going on. What the Chinese government has said is essentially, we are going to do the audit of Chinese companies and then tell the SEC what the mission. So they regulate stocks in the United States when you're a public company.
Oh man, did we lose him here? He was dropping knowledge bombs. Alex, can you hear me? Alex. All right, I'm going to try calling Alex Erpy back here. Drew, did you lose him?
Yeah, I'm not seeing any movement or sound.
All right, let's see if we can get Alex back on the stream here. Dang, he was dropping knowledge bombs. Alex Erpy, if you're watching this, I'm going to Skype you back right now. He was talking about the Chinese government and how the Chinese government is essentially going to try to audit these businesses and provide the financials for investors. And that's just not the way it works. I mean, you want transparency. You don't want a government that's corrupt, that's dishonest, providing that financial work. I'm going to see if I can get him back on the line. But you look at the sell-off of these Chinese positions, and they are dramatic and astronomical, and it's impacting the markets here. Alex, we got you back here. I can hear you. I can hear you now. This is like a Sprint commercial right here. All right, so where you were at was the Chinese government told the SEC?
Okay, so basically the Chinese government told the SEC, we are going to provide you the audited financials. We're going to audit our companies ourselves and tell you the results. And the SEC, which regulates public companies, said that's not going to fly. We are not going to accept your word for, yeah, this is audited results for my own country's companies. Right? And so that's a major decision. Is we as investors, I mean, particularly, just thinking of myself, I'm a fiduciary of my clients' funds. In other words, when a client comes to Emergent Financial Services, we have to treat their money as though it's our own money. And that gives us certain responsibilities to know what we're investing in. So we're already in the process of basically looking through and saying, can we honestly put our clients in a company, no matter if we think it's going to do well or not, that we can't honestly say to them, yes, these are their financials, and we trust that these are legitimate numbers. Because if the answer to that is no, then we can't really justify that investment.
So you're saying we should dump the Chinese stocks?
To be honest, for Emergent Financial Services, we are temporarily putting a hold on that for our clients and seeing how we can do it, how we can have emerging market exposure with more limited Chinese exposure. Because a lot of emerging market, you're talking 30% China. And I think as retail investors, that's something to think about also, because not even from the perspective of, do I think Chinese companies are going to go down or up, right? A lot of these Chinese companies may well still do well. I mean, that stock Alibaba might recover and do really well. JD Holdings could spike again. But just from the perspective of saying, making a rational decision on whether to buy or sell a stock, typically one of the things you rely on is, what were the sales? What were the expenses? What's the profit? What's the revenues? But if as an investor, I'm sitting there saying, I don't know what they really are, right? I know what the company says they are. And for those who remember like Exxon, Enron scandals, right? That's basically what happens if a company is putting out baloney numbers. Because the numbers look great, and then they audited it and said, oh, wait, this was all fake. And those stocks crashed. So it's really something to think about as an investor, saying, what's the information threshold I need? In other words, how much do I need to know about a company before I'm comfortable putting my money in it, right? Owning a share of it. And for some companies, for some people, it might be very little. They might say, you know what, I really don't know too much about this company, but that's good. I'm going to take a bet on it.
But that's not investing.
That's not investing, exactly. For me, that's speculation.
For me, that's gambling. That's playing the lottery.
Exactly. So I think this is one of those very rare occurrences where you sit there and say, is there going to be enough information to credibly invest in Chinese companies listed on U.S. exchanges if basically we're saying the auditor for these numbers
communist government
is their own government,
yeah,
is the Chinese Communist Party.
Yeah, that's not good. Oh, God. So you're saying get the hell out of J.D. Cobb and NEO, the EV company. You're saying get out of these.
And maybe even temporarily. I mean, it's something to think about from a temporary perspective. Say, all right, let me get out until I know where this is going, until I know what the final ruling is going to be. And I'm not saying never return to China, right? China's a big market, as we all know. But I think particularly retail investors, and especially I would say like firms that manage people's money, just from a fiduciary perspective, be thinking about, like, if I can't trust the information, how do I justify either to myself or to clients, yeah, this is why I'm buying this stock, because I think their sales are going to go up this much, even though I don't know if these are actually their sales numbers.
Great stuff right there from Alex Serpy, CEO, Emergent Financial Services. My friend, Thursday morning, 10:15 a.m., Today y Mañana, with Alex Serpy, with Xavier Yerpy. Tell us what you got planned.
It's going to be fun. It's funny talking about Charlottesville economic growth and the things that are happening. We've got two awesome guests. So first we're going to have Stephanie Guevara. So she is the owner of Seaville Picnic. So basically she's one of the Seaville Picnic. They basically organize picnics for people in Charlottesville. It's almost similar to like selling an experience. We'll provide everything for you. We'll find you the place. We'll get you the food. So I thought it was a really awesome business model. So she's going to be on to tell us about that business. And then we're going to have, on a more macro, stale. Samantha Strawn, so she's the manager of the shops at Stonefield.
Oh,
So she's going to come talk to us. We'll get an idea of what she's seeing out at Stonefield, where she sees the business communities going in terms of new businesses popping up, people going out, people spending more time. So I think that'll be really interesting, just to have the little micro perspective of what's an entrepreneur seeing on the ground, and then the macro perspective of what's the manager of numerous shops, of a place where numerous shops are located, I should say, seeing in Charlottesville. So I think it'll be a really fun show.
my friend, great stuff today. Alex Erpy, CEO of Merchant Financial Services. Today y Mañana, a fabulous talk show, airs Thursdays at 10:15 a.m. right here on the I Love CVille network. It's going to be a really good one on Thursday. Alex, thank you for the knowledge today.
Oh, no, thank you, Jerry. Pleasure as always.
You have a good one.
You too.
All right, Alex Erpy, boys and girls, CEO of Merchant Financial Services. Trusted people right there. Markets are down. I mean, and down considerably right now. So we're going to continue to follow the sell-off. You got some news from the CDC. You got some news from China. And you got red across the board. I'm looking at it on the big screen here in the office. I mean, the NASDAQ is flirting with 2% down here. The Dow and the S&P both bleeding red right now. S&P flirting with a percentage point. So I want to get a couple items out of my notebook. What do I think Charlottesville is going to look like 10 years from now? What do you think Charlottesville is going to look like 10 years from now? Best perspectives, best comments, get I Love CVille stickers. We're mailing one each show to a viewer or listener that makes the show better today. Guys, 10 years from now, my prediction for this town, and I'm going to describe it this way. City of Charlottesville, first. The urban ring, which is out in Albemarle County, second. And then Albemarle County as a county in totality, third. I'm going to describe those three geographical territories and how or what I think they will look like 10 years from today. I'm a direct person. I'm a to-the-point person. I think you know that by watching the show. 10 years from now, I see it more affluent, more white, higher populated, more congested, deep-pocketed, and much more closely comparable to a Palo Alto than we have ever been. And the fear for so many of us is this evolution or this change of the demographics in our area and how they're aligning with Palo Alto, Stanford, California, and how it does not align with what we want today for our community to turn into. Homogeneous, lacking diversity, lacking well-rounded thought or eclectic thought. That's not what so many of us want. The invisible hand of the free market, the invisible hand of capitalism, she is a tricky, tricky woman. And when we think we may be managing the invisible hand of the free market or capitalism, we realize, no, we are not. And as Alex described in our fantastic interview, the second order of UVA expanding, the second order of a data science school, the second order of Charlottesville City becoming a tech hub like Palo Alto, the second order is less diversity, more population, more wealth, more congestion, more traffic, and potentially an impact on quality of life. We say and we think, let's bring these firms and attract them to the area. Dexcom is a great example. Publicly traded business, Dairy Central. I mean, fabulous business to work for, Dexcom. It's a company that develops, manufactures, and distributes continuous glucose monitoring systems for diabetes management. I know firsthand with folks in my family the impact Dexcom positively has on folks with diabetes. They pay well. The benefits are great. Vacation time is excellent. Work environment is strong. But when firms like this are welcome to the community, the second order after an improved economy, improved GDP, is a changing demographic, is a changing look of the town. You look at the African American population in the city of Charlottesville. Google the statistics and numbers. The African American population in the city of Charlottesville is dropping from a size amount, from a number of amount. It's becoming smaller in the city of Charlottesville. Google it. You can do it. I've done it. Very straightforward, the answers you'll find right away. I was having this conversation last night. I'm a guy that believes in freedom. I'm a guy who, when it comes to it, is very much a libertarian at heart. I'm a guy who's socially liberal, physically conservative. I'm an entrepreneur and a businessman. I'm a free market guy. I'm a free market guy. I've spent 13 years in June, July, 13 years and almost 2 months as a self-employed individual who goes to work every day and figures out a way to feed his family, J-Dubs' family, himself and his beautiful dog, Liza. You know I love Liza, Judah. She eats the creme de la creme of dog food, does she not? Animal Connection, X Park, best of the best of the best. You go into an office or a building every day and you feel the pressure of mortgage payments, of payroll, of electric and water bills, HOAs and taxes, internet bills and cable bills and cell phone bills, and keeping food on the table for your wonderful wife and your son, getting involved with all the various activities that your young son needs to get involved to be socially acclimated for the world. And you start feeling the pressure of being a business owner. And so many small and medium-sized businesses in this community, me included, appreciate that the economy is strong and growing and booming. And each year, 13 years straight, we've enjoyed double-digit percentage revenue growth at these businesses. And part of it you want to say is, sure, you're a hell of a businessman, Jerry, and you have some vision and some willingness to take risk, and you understand how to hedge risk, and you're willing to take risks that put you ahead of the market. This network is a good example. But you also have to be frank and honest with yourself, and if you're frank and honest with yourself, you realize that you were fortunate enough to be in a town that has a world-class university in its backyard that's bringing in more students every year, hiring more team members at the university every year, and the city of UVA, not the city of Charlottesville, but the city of UVA is insulating this economy and driving growth where other jurisdictions like Martinsville, like Lynchburg, like Harrisonburg, like Bristol, they don't have the luxury of having the city of UVA at its disposal. And I'm not knocking any of those jurisdictions. I'm not knocking the municipalities and the towns and cities that I just rattled off. But we have to be honest and frank with ourselves. We have UVA in this town, and it's such a behemoth, such a tailwind driver, that we are lucky and fortunate to have our firms birthed in the shadows or the footprint of Thomas Jefferson's University. The UVA momentum is not going to slow, it's going to get greater. Tailwinds behind that momentum. Bigger push. More impact. And I'm quite confident with what I'm going to say right now. This $125 million data science school that's a couple of years away is going to impact this town in ways that we have not even considered, nor do we have the perspective to know how the change is going to transpire. Data science is the rage. It's in vogue, and it's needed at every industry. As our friend Keith Smith says, he hears constantly, show us the data. Let me see the data. Let's analyze the data. And when you have, we talked yesterday of the most influential people in Charlottesville. And I said the short list of the 3 most influential people in Charlottesville, in no particular order: Geoffrey Woodruff, Corin Capshaw, and Mayor Nakia Walker. Nakia Walker doing it from a policy standpoint, from a social media platform standpoint, from a politics standpoint, she's the mayor. Capshaw and Woodruff doing it from a behind-the-scenes standpoint through vertically integrated empires that have tremendous access to income and capital to invest and to move and shake. After digesting the most influential people in the city of Charlottesville topic and brainstorming it with friends and family, I'm confident in saying it's Geoffrey and Corin. And from Geoffrey's standpoint, he's creating a farm system with the data science school that's going to straight up funnel talent to his brands and businesses. And the individuals funneled from the school to his brands and businesses will command top dollar, and they will cannibalize the limited housing supply on a landlocked city, driving individuals and families with less resources further and further away from the epicenter of employment. And that, my friends, is a version of gentrification that takes a community from eclectic and diverse to homogeneous, affluent, and it's happening before our very eyes. The efforts of leaders in our community to combat said gentrification should be applauded and commended and championed and pedestaled. But cutting to the chase, those efforts are not keeping pace with capitalism and the free market. Capitalism and the free market, the invisible hand, has momentum that we don't see in real time. But when we reflect in hindsight, we say, wow. And you can start pinpointing on the timeline when things started occurring. Crazy stuff, man. All right, I got a important conference call here in 4 minutes, and then another one at 2. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to carry the CDC and these new mask, I don't want to say requirements, but suggestions to tomorrow's program. We'll talk home prices breaking records tomorrow, Richmond City Council approving a new casino, Virginia Tech product Logan Thomas potentially inking a new contract extension with the Washington football team. But I want to close with this. On Monday at 10:15 a.m., we're launching a new show on the I Love CVille network. We're working on the moniker, but we're anticipating something along the lines of the Monday Market Monitor, a recap or a deep dive on trends that transpired over the weekend in Charlottesville and Central Virginia, trends that will impact all of us short and long term. That's Monday at 10:15 a.m., a brand new show for the I Love CVille network, which takes us to, 20 hours a week, 20 plus hours a week, a live programming for your benefit. I want to thank you guys, the viewer and listeners, for watching the show, for supporting the show, for contributing to the show. I encourage you to support the partners that help us: Skooma Boutique Dispensary next to Rapture, Scott Wagner of Scott Wagner Integrated Medicine, Interstate Pest Control, Ting Fiber Crazy Fast Internet, Animal Connection in Ix Park, Cameron Limousine, Anderson Seafood, just to name a few. We're fortunate to work with some fantastic businesses that want to get local information into the news cycle. Thank you for joining us, guys, on a Tuesday. My name is Jerry Miller for Judah Wickower. This is the I Love CVille show. Take care.